This week on Straight to the Point, the head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dhillon, makes major news on a federal investigation into what she calls an attack on the city's church in Minnesota. More arrests and more charges are expected, so let's get straight to the point. I'd like to begin with the Minnesota church protest. I have the 14-page indictment. It uses a very specific language, takeover, menacing, traumatic. At one point, it alleges a protester said to the congregation, "This isn't God's house, this is the house of the devil." Is this the crux of the alleged civil rights violations?
Well, what you're describing is the allegations relating to the FACE Act. FACE Act is a 1994 law that criminalizes disrupting a religious service or invading a house of worship. And it also covers reproductive rights, abortion clinics, as well as crisis pregnancy centers. And so that is correct. When you go into or even stand outside a house of worship and terrorize, intimidate, and or disrupt what's going on inside, that is a violation of the FACE Act. And then we've also, of course, charged conspiracy to violate federal civil rights in connection with the same offenses.
In the Minnesota church protest, is there evidence of significant premeditation and a broader conspiracy?
Well, yes, there is. And in fact, the grand jury found that and agreed with us that there was probable cause to believe that all 9 of the participants who've been indicted so far were planning and then executed this attack. And you're calling it a protest. I think it's a little more evil and menacing than that. Protests are something that are done from a distance and are restricted by time, place, and manner concerns. These folks hid their intent, and they had a 2-stage attack on this church. There was a first wave of people, and they sent in mainly, I believe, perhaps all white allies of theirs to go sit in the pews as if they were there for a church service. And they lay in waiting for round 2 to come in and then commence the agitation that interrupted the sermon and that put these people in fear. And then these others who were already sitting there lying in wait, they got up like a mob and they were permeated throughout the audience. And so imagine you're sitting there praying and suddenly on the right and on the left and from the door you have people shouting about you being the devil and this not being the house of God, and asking that your pastor get out. That pastor who they were attacking, who works for ICE, was not there that day. So the pastor that everyone has seen in the audience preaching from the front, Pastor Parnell, doesn't work for ICE. And the one they were trying to hunt for that day wasn't even there. But his family was there, and his family was in fear of their lives for what was being said by this mob.
Well, based on the indictment, the congregants describe a lot of fear, a lot of intimidation. Have you ruled out more charges and more defendants?
Not at all. In fact, we are looking for all of the people who invaded that church with the intent to disrupt the prayer service and exclude the ability of the parishioners to exercise their First Amendment rights inside that space. I believe every single person who participated in this should be arrested. Not all of them, of course, may be involved in the planning phase of this. Maybe they went along for the ride. They can make their cases once they're arrested, and their lawyers can make the case for them. But there are other laws that may come into play as well regarding financing of such events. So as we're getting into the evidence here, now that we have arrests and search warrants and so forth, we'll be able to build out more of a case. And of course, the other side can defend themselves as well.
How big is the universe of suspects? Right now we're talking about 10 people. Is it 15 people? Is it 20?
There are 9 people who've been arrested pursuant to the indictment. I believe the total number of people involved in this, based on what we see on the videos that were streamed by the participants themselves, is probably closer to 40 people.
40 people?
Yes.
Okay. Independent journalist Don Lemon was on late night television, and he implied that prosecutors in this case have overreached. He said prosecutors can pretty much say what they want with impunity, and they don't face any sort of consequence. Your reaction?
Well, of course he's going to say that. Don Lemon went into a house of God illegally and claimed that it was his First Amendment right to stick a mic in the face of the pastor during a service. That's not his First Amendment right. He's ignorant of the law. And he's got a very good lawyer. I'm sure his lawyer is telling him that he has a great defense, and maybe he does. And maybe he is able in Minnesota to not be held responsible for the crimes that he committed that day. But look, that's going to be up to a jury to decide ultimately, or a judge. And meanwhile, I and the DOJ and Pam Bondi, my boss, we treated all of the people involved in this the same way. And I have been a journalist, Catherine, and I have written some edgy stories when I was a journalist. I have represented many independent journalists, including the folks at Project Veritas, including David Daleiden, who was prosecuted for recording in public places Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Federation doctors talking about fetal part trafficking. And so I think it's very important that journalists know and get legal advice about the contours of their rights. The mic and the camera are not a license to break the law. And so I think it's also important for your viewers to know that several of the people we've arrested so far claim to be journalists. One of them is William Kelly, who was the white, bearded, angry man shouting about the devil and shouting in the faces of women and children during this event. Another is Georgia Fort, who was one of the last people to be arrested. So there's several of them who claim to be journalists. And so the question is...
So you're saying that in this particular case, you're alleging that the defendants are claiming to be independent journalists as a shield.
Absolutely. Several of them are claiming to be journalists. I don't know that anybody would pay for their content. I don't really care. I mean, and by the way, I don't even want to get into the debate who's a journalist. It's not my job to decide that. That is a very philosophical question. And I love the democratization of the information age today. And I get a lot of my content from X and from people who are not really professional journalists. They didn't go to J school. But Don Lemon calls himself a professional journalist. He worked at CNN. And so I would think that, certainly many people consider him to be. That's not relevant at all to our analysis. Whether you're a journalist or not, you can't break into a church. You can't make children cry. You can't prevent parents from getting to their children in Sunday school to rescue them. You can't make elderly women run out a side door that actually had a cone in front of it because it was dangerous to go in and out that door, slip and injure themselves and have to go to the emergency room. That's all illegal in our country.
Is the strongest evidence against independent journalist Don Lemon his own words and streaming videos?
You keep calling him a journalist. I'm not gonna stipulate to that. But yes, as this was unfolding that day, I happened to be perpetually online myself. I'd look for civil rights cases online, and I saw this, and I was horrified. And there are hours and hours of this content, and the content includes, for the conspiracy charges, and this is laid out in the indictment, all of the pregame activities, call it the tailgating activities of bringing donuts and coffee and kissing some of the fellow conspirators, and then telling the camera he's going to turn off his camera and microphone temporarily so as not to reveal the intent of his co-conspirators as they're gathered outside. And there's a reference to a first wave, and they're videotaping the people who are going to go in and play dead, play possum, until the second wave comes in, and then they all jump up. All of that is evidence of a conspiracy.
Don Lemon also said on late night television that he was willing to turn himself in, that they didn't need to send in federal agents. Is that accurate?
Well, this is something that is frequently offered and done, but there's also reasons why you want to arrest somebody without notice. I'll just leave it at that. There may be law enforcement reasons for that.
Was that the case here?
Look, there's evidence in the possession of people that gets taken into evidence when they're arrested. So there's search warrants and there's executions of multiple things at the same time. So I don't want to get into our law enforcement tools, but Don Lemon wasn't singled out in this way. And I refer you to many exhibits of people who were arrested for offenses by the prior DOJ, including Roger Stone, including Steve Bannon, including a DOJ lawyer who worked in this building, who was dragged out of his house in the middle of the night, children terrorized, pre-dawn raids on a house. I mean, none of that was done here. There was a careful waiting until the event that he was at was over, and he returned to a hotel. It was a public place.
Don Lemon's lawyer, Abbe Lowell, says he was engaged in constitutionally protected activity. And then he took aim at the Justice Department. Lowell said instead of investigating the federal agents who killed 2 peaceful Minnesota protesters, the Trump Justice Department is devoting its time, attention, and resources to this arrest, and he said that is the real indictment of wrongdoing in this case.
Well, I respect Abbe Lowell. He's a very able criminal defense attorney. But the United States Department of Justice has hundreds of thousands of employees, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And we do many things on any given day at the same time. And so what I will say is that Abbe Lowell also knows better. There are limits to the First Amendment. Every good lawyer knows that. There are time, place, and manner restrictions regarding the First Amendment. If a flash mob of protesters, rioters were to break out in a federal court, I guarantee you that the federal judge would have the marshals round up every single one of them and take them into custody. They don't have a First Amendment right to do that in a courthouse. They don't have a First Amendment right as a journalist, whether they're conservative or liberal, to break into an abortion clinic or a pro-life clinic and start filming a woman in stirrups while she's being examined by a doctor. There are limits to these rights. And by law, Congress has said one of those limits is the doors of a house of worship.
Is the Don Lemon case a good use of Justice Department resources?
This isn't the Don Lemon case. This is the invasion of the city's church in St. Paul. It is a very important use of our resources, and it's one of several cases that I have ongoing. Because in the last few years, we have seen many vicious attacks and destructions of property of houses of worship, including loss of life. One of the reasons that so many people were terrorized in that church a couple of weeks ago is because there had been a fatal shooting at a Catholic church in Minneapolis just months earlier. People thought they were in the middle of a mass shooting incident while they were being surrounded by this mob. I have prosecuted successfully and gotten convictions in several cases of attacks on churches in the United States, and I'm investigating attacks on churches and synagogues. There are several open investigations of FACE Act violations involving several houses of worship in the United States, and our country has to have a zero-tolerance policy for invading what should be the last bastion of sanctuary and sanctity in our society, which is a house of worship.
Do you see a scenario where the Justice Department would do plea deals with any of the defendants in this case, including Don Lemon?
Well, I mean, we're interested in doing justice. This is the Department of Justice, and sometimes that means that you make an agreement with a defendant. So nothing is off the table. I would like to, first and foremost, we rapidly went to court to intervene in this matter to seek indictment because I didn't want to see this scenario play out a second Sunday in Minneapolis. It's a tinderbox situation over there. People could get hurt. Someone did get hurt in this attack as detailed in the indictment. People were terrorized. So that's why we went to court so rapidly. It usually takes months to build a criminal case, okay? And DOJ has all the resources. You go about it very carefully. You get a bunch of warrants. You listen to the evidence. We wanted to stop this from happening again, and I believe we've successfully deterred it. But the Attorney General has gone out and put anybody on notice. If you go into a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a mandir, temple, a gurdwara, you will be prosecuted.
I'd like to turn now to the shootings in Minnesota. The Justice Department has opened a civil rights review into the shooting death of the ICU nurse Alex Pretti by Homeland Security agents in January. What are the next steps here?
So I refrain from talking about specifics of open investigations or reviews, but let me tell you what happens in general. In general, the majority of the work of the Civil Rights Division involving use of force cases is focused on use of force potential violations by state or local law enforcement. In the history of our work, there have been many such prosecutions, and we have cases open right now for excessive force or unreasonable force. We start with the law enforcement professionals. So in this case, the people who gather evidence in the Department of Justice are not the lawyers. they're the FBI. And so the FBI, or working in conjunction with colleagues at Homeland Security, they will retrieve the evidence. Step one, preserve gun, bullets, ballistics. If there's a shooting, medical reports. If there's a fatality, coroner's reports, other evidence of that nature. So that's step one, evidence preservation, and that's been underway since the shooting. That happens as a matter of routine in every officer involved.
Have they begun
shooting.
Interviewing individuals?
I can't give you any details of the specific investigation, but I can tell you that there are people assigned to it in my department, and there are people assigned to it and working on it in the law enforcement agencies in question. And if it were other federal law enforcement agencies, it would be the FBI in conjunction with them. And the FBI has advanced ballistic tools and other investigative tools that some of our other law enforcement partner agencies don't have. And so that's why the role of the FBI is very important in these cases.
Will the department consider, or is it considering, opening a civil rights review in the Renee Good shooting?
I can't comment about the specifics of things that are under contemplation or not, but I can say that I have never been told by any supervisor at the Department of Justice that anything is off limits.
There's reporting out of Minneapolis that anti-ICE activists are setting up roadblocks. They are asking people for identification, apparently. They're doing license plate readers. Is this purely a criminal matter, or is there a civil rights element to it?
It's a criminal matter. It's criminal to obstruct federal law enforcement. But let me add something, which is there's a safety concern for us on the part of our fellow law enforcement officers. And look, all of us who work at the Department of Justice these days, and FBI agents and ICE agents in particular, ICE officers, we're being threatened with doxing, death threats, terrorist threats against our lives.
Have you yourself been threatened? How serious are the threats?
Well, someone has been arrested for threatening me with terrorist threats. So it's no joke to be in the DOJ at this point in time. And so when you look at breaking into a car of a law enforcement official and then using what you find in there to dox people and publish their home addresses, suddenly it's not just that ICE agent, it's the children, the wife, the husband. This is a very serious matter. So if you think you can be some kind of a renegade militia to police ICE, you may spend many years in prison for doing that. It is a bad idea. That is not the way to protest. And protest is legitimate, and I cherish protest. I'm a person who's protested myself. That is not the way. So think of other ways to do it, guys.
Earlier today, Tom Homan announced that they're going to make it a priority to bring full body camera deployments to Homeland Security agents and officers in Minneapolis. You reposted this. As head of the Civil Rights Division, how significant is this, and why sort of this patchwork approach among the agencies to body cameras?
Well, I think Tom Homan, who I met in Minneapolis last week, in the course of the work that we're doing here together, is very dedicated as a career professional to doing things the right way. And now some of our agencies are fairly new, alphabet soup of agencies, they change names or what have you. He expressed that as funding permits, this will be rolled out in a non-patchwork way, but immediately starting with the ICE. I think it's great because I believe in transparency, and I think we need facts to evaluate whether people's civil rights have been violated. I think that's very important. I welcome it, and I think it's stunning the extent to which sometimes you look at some very egregious violations of people's civil rights by law enforcement officials, and they have cameras and they turn them off, and they're like, oops, whoops, that didn't work. I mean, that's evidence of guilt right there. You're turning off your camera when you are about to do something naughty. So having a policy where they're on all the time is going to protect everybody.
Finally, I want to talk about the 2020 election ballots and the voter rolls in Georgia. Fulton County, Georgia has filed a motion seeking the return of files that are associated with the 2020 election that were obtained by the FBI through a search warrant. Local authorities have called this improper. In your view, was it improper?
Well, let me give you a timeline. Okay, so I've sued Georgia for its voter rolls. Georgia is one of the states that was a swing state that has refused to turn over its voter rolls as we're allowed to obtain under the 1960 provisions of the Civil Rights Act. That's one lawsuit. Now, secondly, I have reason to believe, based on our knowledge and what we've found out so far, that there were irregularities in Fulton County's processing. It's not a big leap because Fulton County has said that itself. It has come out, and there have been Georgia election boards and Georgia investigations at the state level that have revealed that there was improper handling of hundreds of thousands of ballots. Now, some will say, oh, you can't prove fraud or there's no big deal. But no one's investigated them. No one's done an official review of those. And so we found there to be a basis to obtain those ballots civilly under the civil rights provisions that I administer. I first tried to get them voluntarily by letters. I asked for them. The people in possession of these ballots in Fulton County had already defied requests by Georgia election officials, an election board, to obtain these. So they were already in defiance of state requests. They said no. They said go to the judge. The judge will have them because they were part of a trial. We went to the court. The court said, I don't have them, go over there. It was like a big shell game of who's got the ballots. So I then filed a lawsuit because in a lawsuit, let's sue everybody and y'all can all figure out who's got the ballots and we can get the ballots and then we can conduct our civil review. While that case has been pending, which was filed fairly recently, just weeks ago, other colleagues of mine at the Department of Justice learned that they believed they had probable cause to obtain a search warrant regarding potential criminal violations of the law. And that is what was executed in the search warrant being executed at a election hub, some kind of election storage space offsite of where the election offices are in Fulton County. We don't know exactly what was there, whether that's the totality of what I was looking for or not. So that is to be determined. But generally speaking, when there is a criminal case that comes on the heels of a civil case, the criminal case is going to take precedence because the criminal case has implications of the Fifth Amendment and self-incrimination and so forth. And so we're working all of that out right now. But that criminal case means that a magistrate judge did their job, looked at the evidence, and agreed that there was probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed.
That's under seal. Have you seen the probable cause in this case?
I have not. We're not involved in the details of that.
When we spoke in November, you talked about your belief that there were irregularities in Georgia. Has the investigation uncovered evidence that substantiate your concerns that there were irregularities?
Well, since we initiated that, I believe many more statements have come out from Georgia officials who have confirmed that the ballots were mishandled, not counted properly, but no big deal is their answer to that. I don't think it's disputed that there was mishandling of ballots in Fulton County. The reason I was seeking those ballots is to do some kind of a comprehensive review. So I haven't done it because I don't have the ballots because they hid them from us and they refused to cooperate with our law enforcement investigation.
Will you seek the ballots in other swing states from 2020?
Well, we have certain laws in place that require states and county officials to preserve the ballots for a period of time after the election. That period of time has lapsed. In this case, those ballots existed because there was litigation concerning those ballots. And so there may be pockets somewhere else in the United States where we learn that the ballots from 2020 exist. And if I think there's reason to believe that they were mishandled or there was some irregularity, I might seek to look at them. But, I don't have those facts in front of me right now.
Is the objective, or is it possible to try and conclude this investigation prior to the midterms?
I mean, anything is possible. We have a little less than 11 months, 10 months left. So I would defer to my colleagues who initiated the criminal investigation. They're probably going to have the first bite. Also, DNI Tulsi Gabbard is involved in that and has been tasked with looking at election security matters as well. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of effort to look at those and learn what we can about what happened in those circumstances.
The DNI sent a letter to Congress where she confirmed that she was in Georgia there with the FBI, and she also facilitated a phone call with President Trump. Do you think the DNI's involvement strengthens the investigation or puts at risk allegations of politicization?
I mean, how is it politicized? She's a law enforcement official tasked with our national security, and certainly I don't think there's any dispute that the conduct of our elections, which are literally the way that our government comes into power, is a national security issue, and the security of our elections is incredibly important. I'm comforted as a citizen and as someone at the Department of Justice by the fact that we have national security eyes on this, as well as criminal and civil rights review. Because at the end of the day, as a voter myself and someone who's been involved in politics before I took this job, I'd like every citizen to vote. And a lot of people don't vote. They don't have confidence, they don't care. I think it's important that people have confidence in the outcome of our elections, which will in turn drive people to accept the outcome of the elections and also be more likely to vote. I think that's a very good thing, whoever they're voting for.
In this case, it makes total sense to go to the court records. The indictment will take you 15 or 20 minutes to read back to front, and there's a lot of great detail about this alleged wide-ranging conspiracy. The government's position is that it was organized and premeditated, and we learned from our interview that there's another layer to the investigation, that they're looking at the financing. One of the things that jumped out at me is this allegation that the anti-ICE activists claimed to be journalists as if it was somehow going to shield them from legal consequences. And of course, that will be decided by a court of law. So we'll see you next time on Straight to the Point.